The air inside the lower halls was cold and still, the kind of cold that settled into the bones and never fully left. The lights above flickered, dim and tired, casting long shadows that clung to the walls like stains that would not wash away. In the far corner of a forgotten chamber sat a single figure unmoving. No one called her by name anymore. Names were for those who mattered. She was only a shape now, a presence people stepped around, careful not to look too closely. Her body rested in a narrow chair, metal and worn, its surface scratched by years of careless hands. Her legs lay still, thin and weak, as if they had already given up on the idea of movement. When footsteps echoed nearby, they never slowed for her. They passed her as if she were part of the wall, part of the floor, something built into the place and long forgotten. She had once belonged to this world. That much was clear from the faded marks on her clothing, symbols of a house that no longer claimed her. But belonging was a fragile thing here. It could be taken away quietly, without ceremony, without regret. The guards who patrolled the halls spoke over her head, laughed near her, sometimes even leaned against the wall beside her chair, as if she were invisible. On bad days, they made jokes, low and sharp, about how she was already half dead. On worse days, they said nothing at all. Silence, she had learned, could hurt more than words. She kept her eyes lowered, not because she was ashamed, but because looking up only reminded her of what she no longer was. Inside her chest, her heart still beat, slow but steady, like it was stubbornly refusing to stop. In the quiet moments, when the halls were empty and the lights dimmed even further, she still dreamed. She dreamed of movement, of purpose, of being seen in this world. Worth was simple and cruel. You were valued by what you could give. Strength was everything. Power was respect. If your hands could build, fight, or command, you had a place. If they could not, you were nothing. Even slaves were expected to work, to carry, to bleed for their keep. Those who could not were considered waste, mistakes that should have been corrected long ago. Mercy was not part of the culture. Compassion was spoken of as weakness, something that weakened bloodlines and dulled empires. From the moment a child could stand, they were tested. From the moment they could fail, they were judged. And once judged, there was no appeal. She had failed in the one way that mattered most. Her body no longer answered her will. Where others ran, she remained still. Where others lifted weapons, she could barely lift her own hands. To the proud people of this city, that single truth erased everything else she had ever been. Her mind. Her memories, her past victories, meant nothing without strength to prove them again. They did not see a person when they looked at her. They saw a reminder of fragility, of fear, of what could happen to anyone if fate turned cruel. And so they pushed her aside, hid her away in a forgotten room, far from the bright halls and loud gatherings. She was not punished loudly. She was punished quietly by being ignored, by being reduced to nothing more than a burden no one wanted to carry. Over time, she stopped expecting kindness. She stopped expecting cruelty, too. Both required effort, and effort was something no one was willing to waste on her. Days blurred into nights. Meals came late, sometimes cold, sometimes not at all. When they did come, they were placed on a low table, just within reach, then forgotten. No one asked if she was hungry. No one asked if she was alive. She learned to make herself small, to breathe softly, to exist in a way that did not disturb the world that had already decided she did not belong in it. Yet even then, something inside her refused to disappear. Beneath the numbness, beneath the exhaustion, there was still a quiet question waiting to be answered. If she truly had no value, why was she still here? The answer came not as comfort, but as change. It arrived the day the hall stirred with unfamiliar movement. Voices sounded different, sharper, uncertain. The guards stood straighter than usual, their jokes gone, their laughter swallowed by tension. Something important was happening. She sensed it before she saw it, the shift in the air, the way even the lights seemed to burn a little brighter. From her place in the corner, she watched. Shadows stretch and twist as figures passed, their footsteps heavier, more deliberate. This was not a day like the others. This was a day meant for appearances, for power, for lies dressed as ceremony. They spoke of an outsider, visitor from a distant world, one known for danger and defiance. A human. The word carried weight here, spoken with both fear and disgust. Humans were unpredictable, too stubborn to bend easily, too violent to ignore. That was why the council had invited him, not out of trust, but out of caution. A fragile peace required gestures, and gestures required sacrifice. As preparations were made, she felt a strange pull in her chest, a quiet dread she could not explain. When the guards finally came for her, they did not look at her face. They rolled her chair forward without warning, hands rough, movements careless. She did not ask where they were taking her. She already knew. When a society had no use for you, it found ways to give you away. The chamber was vast and cold, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of powerful figures lined the edges, watching with bored expressions. At the center stood the king, tall and proud, his sharp smile polished for display, and beside him stood the human. He was different from the others, solid and still, his eyes alert, his posture calm but ready. He did not sneer. He did not laugh. He simply watched. When they rolled her forward into the open space, she felt every gaze settle on her like a weight. This was how they planned to end her story. Not with violence, but with humiliation wrapped as generosity. The king spoke of gifts and peace, of rare offerings, of life given freely. Then he gestured toward her, as if presenting an object, something owned, something discarded. She waited for the human to react the way the others expected, for disgust, for amusement, for acceptance. Instead, he froze. His eyes moved from the king to her, then back again, confusion cutting through his calm. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, but there was something else beneath it. Disbelief. "What do you mean she's mine?" he asked. The room tensed. Laughter followed from the council, sharp and cruel. They explained her worth, or lack of it. A burden, a failure, something better removed from sight. She kept her gaze low, ready for the final blow, ready to be claimed. By someone who would treat her no better, but it did not come. Instead, the human stepped closer. He moved slowly, carefully, until he was kneeling in front of her chair. No one had done that in years. His eyes met hers, not with pity, not with hunger, but with quiet concern. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The words hit her harder than any insult ever had. Her throat tightened. For a moment, she could not speak. Names were dangerous things. Names meant you existed. "Zura," she whispered, barely louder. Then a breath. The sound of it felt strange, like touching an old wound. He stood then, turning back to the king, his expression firm. He said he would take her, but not as property. Said she deserved better. The chamber fell silent. No one stopped him as he turned her chair and began to wheel her away. She did not look back. She could not. Her heart pounded, caught between fear and something else, something fragile and unfamiliar. Hope. As the palace doors closed behind them, she wondered if this was another lie, another kind of cruelty she had not yet learned to expect. But for the first time in a long while, the silence around her felt different. It did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something she had almost forgotten how to imagine. The ship was quieter than the palace, but not in the same hollow way. This silence felt soft, like it was giving her room to breathe. When the doors closed and the engines hummed to life, she felt the vibration travel up through the chair and into her chest. It startled her at first. She had grown used to stillness. Movement felt dangerous, like something that could be taken away at any moment. The human Jack guided her into a small room and stopped. He did not rush. He did not issue orders. He simply stepped aside and let her look.
Out there, the room was clean.
Not polished for show, but cared for. The lights were warm, not harsh. There was a bed, wide and soft, and a small screen set into the wall. A window looked out into open space, endless and dark, dotted with distant stars. She stared at them, unable to stop. She had not seen the stars this clearly in years. "Can stay here," Jack said. His voice was calm, like this was the most natural thing in the world. "No locks, no chains." She swallowed. Her fingers curled slightly against the armrest. "Why?" she asked. The question escaped before she could stop it. He shrugged, a small, almost awkward motion. "Because you deserve to be treated like a person." The words settled slowly, like snow. She did not respond. She did not know how. When he left her alone, she expected the familiar panic to rise, the fear of being forgotten again. But it did not come. Instead, she lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the ship. For the first time in a very long time, no one was watching her. No one was judging whether she was useful. Her hands shook as she folded them over her chest. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, unsure if she believed it yet. Still here, days passed, or maybe it was weeks. Time felt different now. Jack did not force conversation. He spoke to her like she was already whole. He brought her food, simple things, warm and carefully prepared. He adjusted the temperature. When he noticed her shiver, at night, he read aloud from old stories, his voice steady and low. She rarely answered, but she listened. Every word felt like a thread pulling her back toward something human. Slowly, without meaning to, she began to respond. A nod, quiet. "Thank you." Once she even asked him a question about Earth, about oceans she had never seen. Then came the night of the nightmare. The scream tore out of her before she was awake. Fire, smoke, the sound of metal breaking. She woke tangled in sheets, her heart racing, her breath broken. Jack was there almost instantly, his hands gentle, his voice firm. "You're safe," he said again and again. She clutched his sleeve like it was the only solid thing left in the universe. When the shaking finally stopped, she whispered the truth she had never spoken aloud. They burned. He did not ask who. He did not ask how. He stayed. Sometimes. That was enough. After that night, something shifted. "Mara." She spoke more, laughed once, surprised by the sound of it. When Jack began working on a device, pieces of metal and wire spread across the workshop. She watched him closely. When he explained, it was to help her stand. Fear rushed in first. Failure had taught her caution, but curiosity followed. Then, determination. The first time she stood, it was only 4 seconds. She fell hard and cried. Not from pain, but from the truth of it. She had stood. She practiced in secret, then openly. Each step was slow, shaking, real. When danger came, it did not find her hiding. It found her standing beside Jack, fighting, choosing. When the ones who had erased her tried to take her back, she refused. Her voice did not shake. She went back to the place that had forgotten her and spoke her name aloud. She fought, not with anger, but with certainty. And when she won, she did not ask for mercy. She asked for truth. In the end, when the ship left the capital behind, she stood at the window again, this time on her own legs. The stars looked the same, distant and bright, but she was different. She was no longer waiting to be saved. She had already begun to. Live the journey did not end when they left the capital behind. In many ways, it was only beginning. The ship moved quietly through open space, stars drifting past like slow thoughts. Zura spent long hours walking the length of the corridor, her steps still careful, still measured. Some days were harder than others. Some days her body ached and her strength felt thin. But she did not stop. Every step was a choice now, not a demand forced on her by others. Jack watched without interfering. He had learned when to help and when to stand back. When she fell, he waited to see if she would rise on her own. Most of the time, she did. When frustration tightened her jaw and her hands shook, he reminded her to rest, not quit. At night they talked more. Not about war or councils or titles, but about small things. Food, music, the strange habits of humans and the odd customs of her people. She found herself smiling without realizing it. The emptiness inside her chest was no longer hollow. was filling slowly with something steady. Messages began to arrive from distant systems. Stories traveled fast. Whispers of a Zoric warrior who had returned from death. A woman who walked again, who fought with precision and restraint, who refused to bow. Some messages were curious. Some were fearful. A few were hopeful. Zura read them all in silence. She did not answer. She did not need to. For so long she had been erased. Now, simply existing was enough. One evening, as the ship drifted between jump points, Zura stood beside Jack at the control panel. The glow of the screens reflected in the metal of her braces. "What happens next?" she asked. It was not fear in her voice. It was openness. Jack leaned back, considering the stars ahead. "We go where we're needed," he said. "Where we want." She nodded slowly. That answer felt right. They answered distress calls. They carried supplies to places forgotten by trade routes. Sometimes they fought. Sometimes they healed. Zura learned to move without the exosuit for longer. Periods. She trained her body and her mind not to become who she was before, but to become someone new. Stronger in ways no council could measure. When people looked at her now, they did not see weakness. They saw calm. They saw resolve. One quiet night, Zura recorded another log. Her voice was steady, clear. "I was abandoned once," she said. "Not because I lacked worth, but because others were afraid to see it. I am not afraid anymore." She paused, then added softly, "And I am not alone." She ended the recording and looked out at the stars. Feeling their vastness, without feeling small, Jack joined her, standing close, not touching, but present. "You changed the course of more than your own life," he said. Zura shook her head. "Gently, no," she replied. "I remembered it." The ship moved forward, engines humming, cutting a quiet path through the dark. Wherever they went next, they would go together, not as rescuer and burden, not as broken and whole. To people who had chosen to stand and keep moving, no matter how wide the galaxy became, time continued to move forward, steady and patient, like the ship itself. Zura no longer counted days by pain or fear. She counted them by progress. By the distance she could walk without stopping. By the moments she caught herself laughing before. She remembered that. Once she never did. Her body still had limits, but those limits no longer defined her. They were simply facts, not verdicts. Jack adjusted the ship's course one morning, his brow slightly furrowed as new data scrolled across the screen. "We're entering a busy sector," he said. "Trade routes, patrols, a lot of eyes." Zura nodded. Crowds used to terrify her. Too many stares, too many judgments. Now, the thought only made her straighten her shoulders. "Let them look," she thought. "I am not hiding anymore." At the next station, people noticed her. Not because she was weak, but because she walked differently. Because she carried herself with quiet authority. Few whispered. Some stared. One child pointed and asked too loudly why her legs looked strange. The child's parent rushed to apologize. Embarrassed. Zura knelt slowly so she was at eye level and smiled. "They helped me stand," she said simply. The child nodded, satisfied, and ran off. Jack watched from a distance, something warm settling in his chest. She hadn't just survived. She had learned how to exist without fear of being seen. Later that night, the ship received another message. This one was not a distress call. It was an invitation. A small colony on the edge of known space had heard the stories. They were struggling, divided, afraid. They asked for help, not with weapons, but with guidance. Zura listened to the message twice. When it ended, she was quiet for a long moment. "They want me?" she asked. Jack smiled slightly. "They want someone who knows what it's like to be cast aside and still stand." "Up." She exhaled slowly. "Then we should go." The colony was rough, built from patched metal and hope. People argued openly, fear sharp in their voices. They didn't trust easily. Zura stood among them and spoke, not loudly, not forcefully. She spoke about loss, about being abandoned, about choosing not to disappear. She didn't promise miracles. She promised effort. Slowly, the shouting faded. People listened. For the first time, she realized her strength was no longer just physical or tactical. It was something deeper. She could endure. She could lead without dominating. She could stand in broken places and not break with them. When they left the colony days later, it was calmer. Not perfect, but moving forward. As the ship lifted away, Zura leaned back in her chair, exhausted and fulfilled. "I think this is who I am now," she said quietly. Jack glanced at her. "Someone who helps others stand." She nodded. "Someone who refuses to let silence erase people." The stars stretched ahead of them, endless and indifferent, yet full of possibility. Zura watched them with steady eyes. Once the galaxy had decided she was nothing. Now she decided who she would be. And as the ship moved on, carrying her toward whatever waited next, she felt no fear of the dark ahead. She had walked out of a deeper one already. The farther they traveled, more Zura understood that healing was not a straight path. Some mornings she woke with fire in her muscles, every movement stiff and slow. On those days, the memory of the cold room returned without warning. The silence. The way people looked through her instead of at her. She would sit by the window and breathe until the feeling passed. Jack never rushed her, learned her quiet signals. The way her jaw tightened when she was tired. The way her eyes softened when she felt steady again. Without words, he adjusted. Their plans. That kind of care, given without demand, still surprised her. They received word of a Zoric patrol operating near the outer systems. Old instincts flared in her chest, sharp and uneasy. For a moment, fear whispered that they would come for her again, that everything she had rebuilt could be taken away. She stood in the training bay that night, her reflection staring back at her from the metal walls. The exosuit rested nearby, silent and waiting. She did not put it on right away. Instead, she stood on her own, feeling the weight of her body, the strength she had earned step by step. "I am not running," she said quietly to the empty room. Jack found her there later. "We can change course," he offered. Zura turned to him and shook her head. "No," she said. "Not this time." There was no anger in her voice, only certainty. "If they see me, they will see who I am now." Jack studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we face it together." The patrol never attacked. They scanned the ship, hesitated, then pulled back. Perhaps they recognized her name. Perhaps they recognized her stance. Or perhaps they felt something had changed and chose not to test it. As the threat faded from the screen, Zura felt a deep release inside her chest. Not relief, but closure. The past no longer had teeth. Later, as the ship drifted through a calm stretch of space, Zura sat beside Jack and watched the stars turn slowly. "I used to think surviving was enough," she said. "Now I know it isn't." Jack glanced at her. "What is enough then?" She smiled faintly. "Living with purpose and choosing it every day." She began training others through messages and recordings, teaching strategy, resilience, and the importance of adapting instead of breaking. Some listened. Some didn't. That was fine. She no longer needed everyone's approval. Life she touched felt like a quiet victory. One no council could erase. One night, when the ship lights dimmed and the stars burned bright outside the window, Zura rested her head back and closed her eyes. She was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from moving forward, from standing again and again, even when it was hard. She thought of the girl she had been in that cold room, forgotten and silent. If she could speak to her now, she would say only this: "You made it. And you didn't do it by becoming someone else. You did it by remembering who you were." The ship continued on, cutting a quiet line through the dark. Somewhere ahead were more broken places, more lost voices, more chances to stand. Zura opened her eyes and looked toward the stars, ready.